Your house is lovely. Bernie, my daughter-in-law, Brittany said, wiping the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. My parents will take the upstairs master suite. My sister Courtney and her 3 kids will take the finished basement. Jason and I will move into the main bedroom on this floor to be close to you. You can take the small study off the kitchen. It is cozy and perfect for your needs. It is your duty to take us in. I stared at her. The Thanksgiving turkey sat cold and half-eaten between us. My son Jason refused to meet my eyes, staring intently at his mashed potatoes as if the secrets of the universe were hidden in the gravy. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the silence of the dining room. I smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes and said one single sentence. The entire room went silent, and the color drained from Brittany's face. Before I tell you exactly what I said and how I dismantled their lives, piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone whose name is on the deed. I am Bernard Kowalski, but everyone calls me Bernie. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years I was a structural engineer here in Seattle. I built skyscrapers designed to withstand earthquakes. I know how to spot a stress fracture in a foundation long before the building collapses. And looking at my son and his wife across the table, I could see the cracks forming perfectly. My life is simple. I drive a 5-year-old Ford truck, I wear flannel shirts, I bought on sale, and I spend my days tending to the garden. My late wife Catherine loved so much. To the outside world, I am just a lonely retiree living in a drafty old wooden house on the edge of Lake Washington. What people do not see, and what my son Jason has apparently forgotten, is that I bought this land 40 years ago, when Seattle was just a timber town. This drafty old house sits on 3 acres of prime waterfront real estate worth north of $4 million. And the commercial buildings I quietly bought up during the tech boom meant I retired with a portfolio that would make a hedge fund manager weep. But I never flashed money. We lived below our means. We valued privacy, peace, and hard work values I tried to instill in Jason. But looking at the fake Rolex on his wrist and the way he flinched every time his wife spoke, I knew I had failed somewhere along the line. The Thanksgiving dinner was a trap, and I knew it the moment they walked in. Brittany did not bring a dish to share. Instead, she walked in with her smartphone out, scanning my living room with one of those interior design apps that measures square footage. She did not even say hello. She just walked around tapping her screen, muttering about open concepts and load-bearing walls. Now, we sat at the dining table. The air was thick with tension. Brittany pushed her plate away, the food barely touched. It is called intergenerational living. Bernie, she said, her voice dripping with that corporate condescension she uses at her marketing job. It is the future. You are 72, living alone in a 4,000 square foot house. It is wasteful, and frankly, it is dangerous. What if you fall? I looked at Jason. He was 38 years old, but in that moment he looked like a terrified child. Jason, I said calmly. Do you agree with this? Jason shifted in his chair, pulling at his collar. Dad, look. The housing market is brutal right now. You know, my crypto investments took a hit. It is just temporary. Just until we get back on our feet. Plus, Brittany is right, you are getting older. It is a lot of house for one man to manage a hit. I knew from my friend Saul that Jason was in the hole for $500,000 because he bet on the wrong digital coins, and Brittany, she was driving a leased Range Rover she could not afford, trying to keep up appearances while her credit cards were maxed out. Brittany cut him off, snapping her fingers lightly. It is not temporary. Jason, this is a permanent solution. Bernie, my parents. Hank and Linda just sold their place in Florida. They need a place to land, and Courtney, well, she is going through a divorce again. This house is the answer. It solves everyone's problems. We help you with the maintenance, you help us with the space. It is just logical. She laid it out like a business merger. My home, my sanctuary, where Catherine and I raised our boy, was being carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey. Her parents, who I knew for a fact had been evicted, not sold their home, would take the second floor, my sanctuary. Her chaotic sister and her 3 unruly children would destroy my finished basement, and I, the owner, would be relegated to the dusty study next to the noisy kitchen. I felt a surge of rage so hot, it almost blinded me. I wanted to throw them out, right then and there. I wanted to tell them I knew about the debts, the lies, the financial ruin. They were hiding behind their designer clothes, but years of engineering taught me that you do not demolish a building with a sledgehammer if you want to do it right. You use controlled explosives placed at critical structural points. I took a deep breath, letting my hand tremble visibly as I reached for my wine glass. I knocked it over on purpose, sending red wine spilling across the white tablecloth. Brittany gasped, pulling back in disgust. "Clumsy me," I stammered, pitching my voice to sound frailer than I was. "I am sorry. I have been so forgetful lately." My hands shake, my mind feels a bit foggy sometimes. Jason looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "You see, Dad, this is exactly what we are talking about. You need us here to watch over you, Brittany." Eyes narrowed, calculating. She saw weakness, and like a shark, she smelled blood. "Exactly. Bernie," she said, her voice softening into a fake sweetness. "Look, we will handle the logistics. You just rest. We will start moving things around next week." "No," I said, wiping the wine with a napkin, giving them just enough resistance to make it believable. "I need to think. This is a big change." Brittany exchanged a look with Jason, a look of triumph. "You take the night to think about it, Bernie, but honestly, you do not have much of a choice. We are doing this for your own good. We will be back tomorrow to start measuring for the renovations." They left an hour later, leaving me with a wine-stained tablecloth and a cold house. But as soon as their taillights disappeared down the long driveway, I stood up straight. The tremor in my hand vanished. I walked to my office, unlocked the safe, and pulled out the blueprints of the house. Then I called Saul, my lawyer. "Start the paperwork." "Saul," I told him, "they took the bait. The next morning was Black Friday. But the real invasion happened at my front door at 9 a.m. sharp. I was drinking coffee on the porch when a beat-up moving truck and 2 SUVs pulled into my driveway. It was not just Jason and Brittany. It was the whole circus, Brittany's parents. Hank and Linda climbed out of one SUV, looking around with critical eyes. Hank, a man who had bankrupted 3 home businesses, lit a cigarette and flicked the ash onto my driveway. Linda was wearing a fur coat that looked like it had seen better decades. "Well, it needs a coat of paint," Linda said loudly, not even acknowledging me sitting 10 feet away. "But the view is decent. We can work with this." Then came the chaos. Courtney, Brittany's younger sister, spilled out of the other car, followed by 3 children who looked like they had been raised by wolves. Within seconds, they were running across the lawn, trampling the winter hydrangeas Catherine had planted 20 years ago. I stood up, my mug warm in my hand, trying to keep my temper in check. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice firm. Brittany marched up the steps, clutching a clipboard. Of all things. "Oh, Bernie, good morning." We decided not to wait, since it is a holiday weekend. We thought we would get a head start on the organizing. Mom and Dad brought a few boxes just to store in the garage for now. Just a few boxes. The truck was packed to the brim. They were not storing things they were moving in without my permission. Jason was hiding behind the truck, pretending to secure a rope. He knew this was wrong. He knew this was trespassing. But he was too weak to stop the locomotive. That was his wife, Bernie. "Be a dear and help Hank with the gate," Linda shouted from the driveway. "We need to back the truck up to the front door." I did not move. "This is my house," I said. "You do not move in until I say so." Brittany sighed, loud and dramatic. "Stepping into my personal space, Bernie. We talked about this. You are confused again. Remember last night? You agreed we needed to take care of you. Do not make this difficult, or we will have to have a serious conversation about your competency." There it was. The threat. The implication that if I resisted, they would claim I was senile and take legal control. It was a bold move, and it confirmed everything Saul had warned me about. Fine, I said, lowering my head, feigning defeat. Just please be careful with the furniture. They swarmed the house. Like locusts, I watched as Hank walked into my living room with his muddy boots leaving tracks on the hardwood floors. I watched Courtney's children run screaming down the hall, banging toy trucks against the wainscoting. But the breaking point came 20 minutes later. I was in the kitchen when I heard a crash from the living room. I rushed in to see Linda standing by the fireplace holding an empty hook in her hand. On the floor, the frame was shattered, the glass broken lying on top of the portrait of Catherine. The photo was from our 25th anniversary, her favorite picture. "Oh, oops," Linda said, looking down without a shred of remorse. "That picture was so gloomy, anyway. Bernie, it really aged the room. We need something more modern here, maybe a mirror to open up the space." I felt my heart stop, and I looked at the shattered glass over Catherine's smiling face. I looked at Jason, who was standing right there watching his mother-in-law disrespect his own mother. "As memory wushin, Joe," I said, my voice low. "Say something." Jason looked at Linda, then at Brittany, who was busy directing the movers. He looked at me and shrugged. "Dad, it is just a picture. We can get a new frame. It does look a little dated." That was the moment. The last thread of hope I held for my son snapped. He was gone, replaced by this hollow shell of a man who would let strangers trample his mother's memory for a free place to live. I did not yell, I did not scream. I bent down and carefully picked up the photo, shaking the glass shards off Catherine's face. I pressed the photo to my chest. "You are right," I said softly, my voice trembling with a rage they mistook for sadness. "It is a new era, I suppose." "Good, glad you are being reasonable," Linda said, stepping over the broken glass to point at the wall. "Put the TV there. Hank." I walked out of the living room, clutching the photo. I walked past Courtney, who was letting her kids draw on the oak paneling with markers, and I walked past Brittany, who was on the phone ordering paint for my bedroom. I walked into the downstairs bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask any sound. Then I reached under the sink and pressed a small hidden panel. The wall popped open, revealing a high-tech control pad. I am a structural engineer. I built this house to last, but I also built it to be smart, long before smart homes were a trend. I tapped the screen, activating the internal surveillance system. Hidden cameras in the vents, microphones in the light fixtures, motion sensors in the walls. The screen lit up with feeds from every room I saw. Hank putting his feet up on my coffee table. I heard Brittany telling Courtney, "I cannot wait to get the old man into the basement. This place is going to be a showstopper once we gut the kitchen." I watched them, I listened to them, I recorded them. They thought they were conquering a senile old man's castle. They did not realize they had just walked into a fortress, and the commander was not sleeping. He was just waiting for the perfect moment to seal the exits. I pulled out my phone and dialed Saul again. "They are in," I said, watching Linda throw my favorite throw blanket into a trash bag. "The disrespect is documented. Good," Saul said, his voice gravelly and sharp. "We let them get comfortable, Bernie. We let them think they have won the eviction moratorium. Laws in Washington are tricky if they establish residency, but you are selling the property, not evicting them. Remember the strategy. Let them dig the hole deep." "I know," I said, watching Jason open a beer, my beer from my fridge, at 10 in the morning. "How long do I have to endure this?" 3 days, Saul said. "Give them 3 days to hang themselves. The closing documents with the investment firm are ready for Tuesday morning. You just need to survive the weekend. Can you do it?" I looked at the monitor showing Courtney's kid smashing a vase. I looked at the photo of Catherine in my hand. For her, I can do anything. I said. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back out into the chaos. The invasion had begun, but they had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was already rigged to blow. The only question was how much of my house would be left standing when the dust settled. I walked into the kitchen where Brittany was already measuring the cabinets for replacement. "Oh, Bernie, there you are," she said, not looking up. "We are ordering pizza for lunch. Pepperoni works for everyone, right?" I hate pepperoni, and she knew it. "Pepperoni is fine," I said, walking past her toward the basement door. "I am going to rest in the study." "Good idea," she said. "Stay out of the way. We have a lot of work to do to make this place livable." I went into the small study and closed the door. The sounds of their destruction vibrated through the ceiling. But I sat at my desk, turned on my computer, and pulled up the live feed. I watched them invade my home, feeling a cold calm settle over me. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I whispered to the screen. "Because you are not just losing a house, you are losing everything." I told them I was going for my daily walk to the park, just to get out of the house. The air inside my own home had become toxic, thick with the smell of Hank's cheap cigarettes and the noise of Courtney's children screaming over video games. Jason didn't even look up from his phone when I left. He just grunted something about not being too long because Brittany needed me to move my boxes out of the study by noon. I walked down the driveway past the overflowing moving truck and turned the corner. But I didn't go to the park. I walked 2 blocks to the gas station, called a private car service, and headed straight for the Columbia Center in downtown Seattle. When I walked into the glass-walled office on the 42nd floor, the receptionist didn't ask for my name. She stood up immediately and buzzed me through. "This is the world my son doesn't know I inhabit. To him, I am just an old man with a pension. He has no idea that the building we were standing in pays rent to a holding company that I own." Saul Weinstein was waiting for me. We have known each other for 30 years. He is a shark in a $3,000 suit, a man who eats corporate mergers for breakfast. But when I walked in, he looked at me with the soft eyes of a funeral director. "Sit down, Bernie," he said, gesturing to the leather chair facing his desk. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask about the weather. He just slid a thick black folder across the mahogany desk. It hit the wood with a heavy thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. I opened it. The first page was a financial forensic report on my son Jason. I knew things were bad. I knew he had made some poor choices. But I was not prepared for the sea of red ink that stared back at me. $524,000. That was the number. My son wasn't just in the hole. He was buried alive. He didn't lose this on a bad housing market, Bernie Saul said, his voice devoid of emotion. He lost it on speculative cryptocurrency. He leveraged everything. He took out personal loans, he maxed out credit lines, he even borrowed from unauthorized private lenders. He was gambling, Bernie. He was betting the house on magic beans, and the market crashed. I felt a physical pain in my chest. I spent 40 years calculating loads and stresses, ensuring that steel beams could hold thousands of tons. I taught my son the value of $1. I taught him that wealth is built brick by brick, not by clicking a button on a screen. And here he was, $500,000 in debt, because he wanted a shortcut. "Turn the page," Saul said. The next page was Brittany, my daughter-in-law, the marketing executive who looked down on my flannel shirts. Her credit card statements were a testament to a life built on sand. $80,000 in consumer debt. Designer handbags worth $3,000 apiece. Weekly spa treatments. And that Range Rover she drives. It is a lease, and she is 4 months behind on the payments. "They are drowning," Bernie Saul said, leaning forward. "They are living a lifestyle that requires a CEO salary on an income that barely covers the interest. They are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now Peter is coming for his money." I turned the page again. Hank and Linda. The parents who claimed they had sold their house in Florida to move here. A court-ordered eviction notice. They didn't sell anything. The bank foreclosed on their condo 6 months ago. They have been living in a motel for the last 8 weeks until their credit cards declined. They didn't come to Seattle to take care of you. They came because they literally have nowhere else to go. You are not a host, Bernie. You are a homeless shelter. I closed the folder. My hands were shaking not from age but from a cold, hard rage. They lied to me, every single one of them. They looked me in the eye and told me this was about family, about intergenerational living, about love. It is a parasitic infection, Saul said bluntly. And like any parasite, they need a host to survive. That is why they are so aggressive. They are desperate. If they don't secure your assets within the next 30 days, they are on the street. All of them. I looked out the window at the gray Seattle skyline. I own 3 other commercial buildings in this city under the name BK Holdings LLC. Jason doesn't know about them. If he did, he would have tried to leverage them too. Those buildings generate enough passive income to support 10 families, but I never touched the money. I reinvested it. I saved it. I thought I was building a legacy for my son. Instead, I built a target. They don't know about the LLCs. Saul confirmed, checking a document. They only know about the house. They checked the public tax records, Bernie. They know the house is free and clear. They know the land value has skyrocketed to $4.5 million. That is their lifeline. That is the only thing standing between them and total ruin. So what is the play? I asked, my voice steady. Saul opened a second folder. This one was thinner, but much more dangerous. This is what my private investigator found in their digital trash, he said. Brittany has been emailing a doctor, a specialist in geriatric cognitive decline. Not to treat you, Bernie, to diagnose you. I felt the blood drain from my face. She is building a case for a conservatorship, Saul said. They are not just going to pressure you to sell. That is taking too long. They are going to try to prove you are mentally incompetent. If they get a doctor to sign off on dementia or Alzheimer's, they can petition the court to take control of your finances immediately. They will have power of attorney over everything. Your bank accounts, your pension, and the house. He looked me dead in the eye. Bernie, listen to me carefully. This is not a family squabble. This is a hostile takeover. If you have a stroke, if you fall down those stairs, if you get confused for even 1 minute in front of a doctor they hire, they will lock you away in a state facility and liquidate this house within 24 hours. They don't want to live with you. They want to liquidate you. I thought about the scene this morning, the way they moved in like an army, the way Linda smashed Catherine's picture, the way they were already measuring the walls. They were not moving in to live. They were moving in to stage the property for sale. They need to pay off the crypto sharks. They need to pay off the eviction debts. And my house is the piggy bank they intend to smash open. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city I helped build. I know how to spot structural failure. I know when a building is unsound. You can't patch a foundation that is this rotten. You have to condemn it. What do we do, Saul? I asked. Saul smiled a shark-like grin that made me glad he was on my side. We accelerate the sale, he said. I have the buyers from the investment group ready. They have been wanting that waterfront land for years. They are offering all cash. No inspection, no contingencies. We can close on Tuesday. Tuesday. That was 3 days away. But we have a problem. Saul continued. You can't sell a house with squatters in it. And in Washington state, once they establish residency, getting them out is a nightmare. I turned back to him. They haven't established residency, I said. They have been there for 4 hours. Exactly, Saul said. But they are trying to. That is why they brought the truck. That is why they brought the kids. They are trying to dig in. You have to keep them thinking they have won. You have to play the part of the confused, defeated old man for 3 more days. Do not let them know you know about the debt. Do not let them know about the commercial buildings. And for God's sake, do not let them know you are sitting in my office right now. I picked up the black folder with the evidence of my son's ruin. I will play the part I said. Good Saul said, handing me a pen. Sign the intent to sell. Once you sign this, the clock starts ticking. The property transfers to the investment firm at 9 a.m. Tuesday morning. At 9:01 a.m., they are trespassing on corporate property. I signed the paper. My signature was firm. One more thing, Saul said, handing me a small bottle of pills. These are sugar pills, placebos. If they try to medicate you, if they try to give you anything for your nerves or your memory, swap them with these. Do not take anything they give you, Bernie. A man in Jason's position, desperate and cornered, might justify overdosing his father if it meant clearing $500,000 in debt. I took the bottle. It felt heavy in my hand. My son, my little boy who I taught to ride a bike, was now a man I had to protect myself from. I left the office and took the elevator down. I walked out into the rain, letting it soak my coat so I would look like I had been walking in the park. I hailed a cab to take me back to the house that was no longer a home. I was walking back into the lion's den. But the lions didn't know that the zookeeper had already sold the zoo, and I was about to close the gates. The rain had started beating against the cedar siding of my house, a relentless Seattle drizzle that usually brought me peace, but today sounded like a countdown clock ticking away the seconds of my life. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at a cup of lukewarm tea, trying to ignore the sounds of Courtney's children destroying my living room when Brittany walked in. She wasn't alone. Bernie, look who stopped by, she said, her voice pitched high and bright, the way one might talk to an unruly toddler or a very slow pet. This is Dr. Aris. He is a very good friend of mine from the club, and he just happened to be in the neighborhood. I thought since you've been having these episodes, it wouldn't hurt for him to take a quick look at you. I looked at the man. He didn't look like he was just in the neighborhood. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and carrying a medical bag that looked brand new. He had the eyes of a used car salesman and the smile of a predator who had just cornered a wounded animal. I knew instantly this wasn't a house call. It was an appraisal. Hello, Bernard, Dr. Aris said, stepping into my personal space without asking. Brittany tells me you've been feeling a bit confused lately, forgetting things, getting agitated. Is that right? I gripped my mug, my knuckles turning white. I'm fine, I said, my voice raspy. Just tired. A lot of changes in the house. Of course, change is hard at your age, the doctor said, pulling a stethoscope out of his bag. He didn't even warm it up before pressing it against my chest. His exam was a farce. He shone a light in my eyes for half a second. He tapped my knee with his finger, not a reflex hammer. He was going through the motions, just enough to make it look official on paper. He asked me questions designed to trip me up. Rapid-fire questions about dates, presidents, and math equations. I answered them correctly, but I paused intentionally, before each one stuttering slightly, playing the part of the frail old man they wanted to see. Every time I stuttered, I saw Brittany tap the screen of her phone, which was propped up against the sugar bowl facing me. The red recording dot was blinking. She was building her evidence. While the doctor pretended to listen to my heart, Brittany moved to the counter where my weekly pill organizer sat. I am meticulous about my medication. High blood pressure is the silent killer for men my age, and I have taken lisinopril every morning at 8 a.m. for 10 years. And the pills are small, round, and pink. Oh, Bernie, you forgot to take your afternoon dose, Brittany said, shaking her head with exaggerated concern. See, Dr. Aris, this is what I'm talking about. He just can't manage his own schedule anymore. Here, let me help you. She stood with her back to me, blocking my view of the pill organizer. I heard the rattle of plastic. I saw her hand dip into her pocket, then back to the counter. It was a sleight of hand move, clumsy and amateurish, but bold, because she thought I was too blind to see it. She turned around, holding a glass of water and 2 pills in her open palm. Here you go, pop these down. You'll feel much better. I looked at the pills in her hand. They were blue, oblong, not pink, not round. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. These weren't my blood pressure meds. These were sedatives, or antipsychotics. Something designed to make me pliable. Something to make me sleep or slur my words or stumble so they could call 911 and say, "Look, he's having an episode." They were trying to chemically restrain me in my own kitchen. I looked at Jason, who was leaning against the refrigerator, arms crossed, staring at the floor. He knew. He had to know. He knew I took pink pills, and he was saying nothing. The betrayal hit me harder than any drug could, a physical blow to the gut that actually made the room spin for a moment. "Bernie, take the medicine," Dr. Aris commanded, his voice dropping the friendly veneer. "It's for your own good. Agitation is bad for your heart." I reached out my hand, trembling. I took the blue pills. I put them in my mouth. The taste was bitter, chalky, and chemical. Panic flared in my chest, a primal instinct to survive. I took a sip of water, but I didn't swallow. I held the water and the dissolving pills under my tongue, my cheeks bulging slightly. "Good job," Brittany cooed, patting my shoulder. "I need bathroom," I mumbled, letting a little water drool from the corner of my mouth to sell the performance. I shuffled as fast as I could toward the downstairs powder room. As soon as the door clicked shut, I spit the blue sludge into the toilet and flushed it. I scrubbed my tongue with a hand towel, trying to get the residue off, rinsing my mouth with tap water over and over again. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They were poisoning me. My own family was poisoning me to get a house. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wild, terrified. I took a deep breath, forcing the engineer brain to take over. Structural integrity compromised. Emergency protocols engaged. I couldn't let them know I hadn't swallowed them. If they knew I was lucid, they might try something more forceful. I had to give them what they paid for. I unlocked the door and stepped back out into the hallway. I let my eyelids droop. I dragged my left foot slightly as I walked. By the time I reached the kitchen, I let my knees buckle. I didn't fall hard. I know how to fall safely, but I made it look uncontrolled. I slumped against the doorframe, sliding down until I hit the floor with a heavy thud. "Bernie," Brittany shouted, but there was no fear in her voice, only excitement. I lay on the linoleum, my eyes half open, staring vacantly at the ceiling. I focused on shallow breathing, letting my jaw go slack. "He's out," Aris said, standing over me. He didn't check my pulse. He didn't check my airways. He just nudged my leg with the toe of his expensive shoe. That was fast. Must have a low tolerance. "Is it enough?" Brittany asked. Her voice was crystal clear. "Is it enough for the paperwork?" "It's perfect," Aris replied. "I can classify this as a syncope episode induced by advanced cognitive decline. He's confused. He's forgetting medication. He's physically unstable. I'll write the report tonight. Early onset. Alzheimer's accelerated by stress. You'll have the medical certification for the emergency conservatorship by Friday morning." Friday. That was 2 days away. Saul told me the sale closed on Tuesday. I had to keep this charade up for 3 more days. "Jason, is he okay?" I heard my son ask. His voice was small, trembling. "He's fine, Jason," Brittany snapped. "Stop being such a baby. He's just sleeping. This is the best thing for him. Once we have the legal power, we can put him in that facility in Tacoma. It's affordable and they handle cases like this. Then we don't have to worry about him wandering off or hurting himself while we renovate." Tacoma. The facility she was talking about was a state-run warehouse for the indigent elderly, a place where people went to be forgotten. They weren't planning to care for me here. They were planning to dump me like an old couch as soon as they got the deed. "Help me get him to the couch." Aris grunted. I felt hands grabbing me under the arms. I went limp, dead weight. They dragged me across the floor, my heels scraping against the wood. They dumped me onto the sofa in the living room, the same sofa Linda had put her feet on earlier. Leave him there, Brittany said. Let him sleep it off. I'm going to finish recording the inventory of the valuables in the dining room. I lay there, eyes closed, listening to them divide up my life. I heard the doctor leave, promising to email the fraudulent report. I heard Jason opening a beer, the pop of the tab echoing in the silent room. I waited until I was sure no one was watching. I cracked one eye open, just a slit. Brittany was in the dining room photographing the silver tea set Catherine had inherited from her grandmother. She was smiling, a cold, victorious smile. They thought I was unconscious. They thought I was beaten. They thought the drugs were coursing through my veins, turning my mind to mush. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I wasn't dizzy, I wasn't confused. I was a structural engineer looking at a building that was about to be demolished, and I was the one holding the detonator. I closed my eye again and let out a soft, snoring sound. Let them think they won the battle. Let them think the old man is down. Because when I get up, I am not just going to stand. I am going to bring the whole sky falling down on their heads. I lay there for hours visualizing the plan. Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I just had to survive until Tuesday. And I promised myself right there on that couch that I would not take a single sip of water or a bite of food in this house unless I opened the package myself. The war had moved from psychological to chemical, and I was behind enemy lines. But they made one fatal mistake. They left me my hearing, and they left me my anger. And anger for a man like me is better fuel than any food could ever be. I listened to them laughing in the kitchen, toasting to their future in my house, and I silently toasted back. To the future, I thought. To the short, miserable future you have left. I woke up on the leather sofa with a crick in my neck and the taste of bile in my throat. The living room was dark, save for the harsh light streaming in from the kitchen, where Brittany was barking orders into her phone. My head actually did hurt now, a dull throb behind my eyes brought on by the sheer exhaustion of maintaining this charade. I sat up slowly, letting out a groan that was only half faked. Brittany was at my side in an instant, not to comfort me, but to contain me. You are awake, she said, her voice tight. Good. We need to get you settled before nightfall. Dr. Aris was very clear, Bernie. That episode you had in the kitchen was a warning sign. You are a fall risk. You cannot be climbing the stairs to the second floor anymore. And frankly, even being on the main floor is a liability with all the renovations we are about to start. I looked at her, blinking slowly, trying to process the speed of her takeover, renovations. She had not even been here for 12 hours, and she was already talking about demolition. What are you talking about? I rasped, rubbing my temples. Where am I supposed to sleep? The basement, Brittany said, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. We cleared out the storage room next to the furnace. It is distinct. It is quiet. And most importantly, it is safe. No stairs to fall down in the middle of the night if you need to wander. We moved your cot down there and a few boxes of your things. It will be like a little studio apartment just for you. A studio apartment. She was talking about an unfinished concrete box where I stored holiday decorations and old paint cans. It was damp, it smelled of heating oil, and it had one small window near the ceiling that looked out at the dirt of the garden beds. She was putting me in a cell. Jason entered the room carrying a stack of my clothes. He wasn't even using a suitcase. He had stuffed my flannel shirts and my good Sunday trousers into black, heavy-duty trash bags like they were refuse to be hauled to the curb. He wouldn't look at me. He just kept his eyes on his boots, marching toward the basement door like a prisoner on a work detail. Jason, I said, my voice hardening for a fraction of a second. You are putting your father in the cellar. He paused, his grip tightening on the black plastic bag. Dad, it is just for now, until you get stabilized. Brittany says it is safer. The master bedroom. Well, Brittany and I need to be on the main floor to manage the house, and Hank and Linda need the upstairs because of Linda's knees. It is just logic, Dad. Logic. The logic of a man who owes $500,000 and is willing to bury his father alive to pay it off. Fine, I whispered, letting my shoulders slump. If it is safer. Brittany clapped her hands together, a sharp sound that echoed in the room. Excellent. I am glad you are being reasonable for once. Come on, Jason. Let's get him downstairs so we can start setting up the master suite. My parents will be here with the rest of their things in an hour, and I want the main floor clear. They escorted me to the basement door like I was a child being sent to time out. Jason went first, turning on the single bare bulb that hung from the rafters. The stairs creaked under our weight. The air got colder with every step, a subterranean chill that settled into my bones. They had set up my old army cot in the corner, pushed up against the concrete foundation. A few of my books were stacked on a milk crate. My clothes were in a pile on the floor. It wasn't a room. It was a holding pen. Here you go, Bernie, Brittany said, standing at the bottom of the stairs, hugging herself against the cold. Cozy, right? And look, I even brought you a space heater. Just don't leave it on while you sleep. We don't want you burning the house down with us inside. She turned and marched back up the stairs, her heels clicking on the wood. Jason lingered for a second, looking at the pathetic cot, looking at the gray walls. I am sorry, Dad, he mumbled. It is just temporary. Everything is temporary, Jason, I said, looking at the concrete floor. Even this. He fled up the stairs, closing the heavy door behind him. I heard the lock click. They weren't just moving me. They were containing me. They didn't want me wandering up during their dinner. They didn't want the reminder of their crime walking around the living room. I sat on the cot listening to the furnace hum next to me. Above my head I could hear footsteps, heavy thudding footsteps, furniture being dragged across the hardwood floors I had installed with my own hands 30 years ago. Laughter. The clink of glasses. They were celebrating. I waited an hour. The basement was freezing. The space heater they left was a cheap plastic thing that barely put out enough heat to warm a shoebox. I wrapped myself in an old wool blanket I found in a storage bin and sat in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. I needed water. I had promised myself not to eat or drink anything they gave me, but I had a stash of bottled water in the garage fridge which was accessible through the side door of the basement. But first, I had to see. I had to see what they were doing to my home. I crept up the stairs, my socks silent on the wood. I tried the door handle. It was locked from the other side. A simple privacy lock, easy enough to pop with a paperclip, but the message was clear. I was an inmate. I went back down and moved to the utility sink near the washer and dryer. I drank from the tap, the water tasting of copper and iron. Then I heard it. The sound of a heavy body settling into a chair directly above me. The squeak of springs. I knew exactly where that was. It was the living room. Specifically, it was my leather recliner. The chair Catherine had bought me for my retirement. The chair where I read my paper every morning and watched the news every night. It was my throne. I walked to the ventilation grate near the ceiling. The ductwork in this house acts like a primitive intercom system if you know where to listen. I pulled up a stepladder and pressed my ear near the metal. Ah, this is the life, Hank's voice boomed down the vent. That view is something else, Linda. You can see the lights of Bellevue across the water. It is drafty, though, Linda complained. We need to get those windows replaced. Maybe floor-to-ceiling glass. Open it up. Brittany's voice chimed in sharp and eager. We can do that, Mom. Once the power of attorney comes through on Friday, we can take out a line of credit against the equity. This place is a gold mine. We just need to modernize it. Get rid of all this dark wood. Paint it white. Make it look like a magazine. And what about the old man? Hank asked. I heard the distinct flick of a lighter, then the long exhale of smoke. My blood boiled. Hank was smoking in my house, in my chair. I never smoked. Catherine hated the smell. And this bankrupt grifter was sitting in my sanctuary, ashing on my floors, polluting the air my wife used to breathe. "Don't worry about him," Brittany said dismissively. "Dr. Aris said the decline will be rapid, especially in that basement. No sunlight, no stimulation. He will be drooling in a cup within a week. Then we transfer him to the state facility. Out of sight, out of mind." "He is tough, though," Hank grunted. "These old blue-collar types. They hang on out of spite." "Not this one," Brittany laughed. "He is broken, Hank. Did you see him today? He couldn't even stand up straight. He barely fought back when we moved him. He knows he is done. He is just waiting to die. Pass me the wine." This bottle is vintage, apparently. Found it in his cellar. They were drinking my wine, sitting in my chairs, planning my demise, and Hank was smoking a cigarette, putting a burn mark on my life that I could never scrub out. I climbed down from the ladder. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel the ache in my joints. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. They thought they had buried me in the dark, but they forgot that darkness is where I do my best work. I walked to the far wall of the basement behind the large chest freezer that had been empty for years. I pushed the freezer aside. It was heavy, but adrenaline gave me the strength of a man half my age. Behind the freezer was the main electrical panel for the house, but I wasn't interested in the breakers. I reached up to the top of the metal box, feeling for a small indentation in the concrete block wall. I found it. I pressed. A loose cinder block shifted. I pulled it out, revealing a small fireproof safe embedded in the foundation itself. I installed this 20 years ago when I retrofitted the house for earthquake safety. Jason didn't know it existed. Catherine knew, but she took her secrets to the grave. I spun the dial. Left to 32. Right to 14. Left to 5. The heavy click of the tumbler was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. I pulled the safe open. Inside, in a waterproof bag, were the original blueprints of the house. The deed to the property, free and clear. The certificates for the gold coins I had stored in a bank vault downtown. And most importantly, the bearer bonds I had purchased in the 90s. But there was one other document. A document I had prepared 5 years ago when I first noticed Jason's reckless spending habits. It was a transfer of assets into an irrevocable trust. A legal fortress that made me the beneficiary but removed the assets from my personal name. Technically, I didn't own this house. The Catherine Kowalski Memorial Trust owned this house, and I was the sole trustee. Brittany could get power of attorney over me. She could declare me incompetent. She could lock me in a padded room. But she could not touch the trust. The trust had its own bylaws, and one of those bylaws stated that upon any attempt to place the primary beneficiary under involuntary guardianship, the assets were to be immediately liquidated and donated to the Seattle Children's Hospital. I had the nuclear option in my hands, but I wasn't going to use it yet. That would just leave them broke. I wanted them destroyed. I wanted them to feel the floor drop out from under them the way they had tried to drop me. I took the documents and tucked them under my shirt. I pushed the freezer back into place. Then I pulled out my burner phone. I keep it for emergencies for job sites where I don't want my personal number floating around. I had full signal down here thanks to the signal booster I installed in the rafters. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Saul picked up on the second ring. He didn't say hello. He just said status. "They are in," I said, my voice low and steady. "They have established residency in their minds. Hank is smoking in the living room. Brittany is planning renovations. They are drinking the 1982 Bordeaux." "Good," Saul said. "That makes the fall harder. Are you safe?" "I am in the basement," I said. They locked me in. There was a silence on the line. Then Saul's voice dropped an octave, deadly serious. "That is false imprisonment, Bernie. We can call the cops right now." "No," I said. "Not yet. Let them feel comfortable. Let them think the king is dead." I looked around my concrete cell. The shadows seemed to stretch and dance. "Saul, execute Plan B," I said. "Plan B," Saul repeated. "The nuclear option." "Are you sure, Bernie? Once I file this motion tomorrow morning, the property is legally radioactive. The sale to the investment firm goes through, but the eviction notice becomes immediate. The sheriff will be there in 48 hours. "Do it," I said. "And Saul, add the clause about the unauthorized construction." "You want to find them?" Saul asked. "I want to bury them," I said. Brittany mentioned taking down walls. If she touches a single load-bearing beam without a permit, I want the city inspector there before the dust settles. "Consider it done," Saul said. "Hang tight, Bernie. Cavalry is coming." I hung up the phone and sat back down on the cot. Above me, I heard the heavy footsteps of Hank walking across the floor, probably heading to the kitchen to raid my fridge. I lay back on the thin mattress and pulled the wool blanket up to my chin. The smell of the basement was musty and damp, but to me it smelled like gunpowder. I closed my eyes and visualized the structural integrity of my family. The stress fractures were everywhere. The load was too heavy. The collapse was inevitable. And I was the one who was going to pull the pin. "Sleep well, Hank," I whispered into the darkness. "Enjoy the chair. It is the last comfortable seat you will ever have." I woke up to the sound of my house screaming. It wasn't a human scream, but to a structural engineer, the sound of a reciprocating saw tearing through lath and plaster is just as violent. Dust was sifting down from the floorboards above, coating my makeshift bed in a fine layer of white powder. The basement light fixture rattled against the joists. It was Saturday morning. They hadn't even waited for the ink to dry on the fake medical report before they started tearing my life apart. I sat up, my joints stiff from the cold, damp air. I brushed the drywall dust off my face and reached for my phone. It was 7:30 in the morning. Brittany wasn't wasting time. She wanted that open-concept living room, and she wanted it now so she could take photos for the listing. I pulled on my robe and shuffled to the stairs. I had to time this perfectly. I needed to look terrified. I needed to look like a confused old man woken from a nap by the apocalypse, but inside my heart was beating with the steady rhythm of a hydraulic press. I opened the basement door, and a cloud of white dust hit me in the face. The living room was a war zone. My furniture, had been shoved into a haphazard pile in the corner, covered with cheap plastic drop cloths. 3 men were attacking the wall between the dining room and the kitchen. They weren't professionals. I could tell by their tools and their lack of safety gear. No respirators, no proper bracing. Just 3 guys in t-shirts hacking away at a wall that I knew for a fact contained the main plumbing stack for the second floor. Brittany was standing in the middle of the chaos, holding a cup of coffee and pointing. "Open it up," she was shouting over the roar of the saw. "I want to see the lake from the kitchen island. Take it all down." "Stop," I yelled, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic. "Stop it. What are you doing? You are hurting the house." Brittany turned to me, her face annoyed. "Go back downstairs, Bernie. We are just doing some light remodeling, making it modern." Light remodeling. They were about to cut through a load-bearing stud. If they took that king stud out the second floor, joists would sag about 3 inches within an hour. The master bathroom tile would crack. The roofline would warp. They were literally bringing the roof down on their own heads. "You can't," I stammered, moving toward them. "That wall, it holds the house up." Brittany rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Bernie. It is not load-bearing." I checked on the internet. She checked on the internet. I built this house with my own hands. I poured the foundation. I framed the walls. I knew every nail and every screw. But to her, I was just a senile obstacle. "Get him out of here," Brittany snapped at Jason, who was standing by the window looking pale. Jason grabbed my arm. "Dad, come on. Let the guys work. It is going to look great. Just go back to your room." I let him pull me away, but not before I saw exactly what I needed to see. No permits in the window. No contractor license numbers on the side of their van parked in the driveway. Just a couple of cowboys working for cash on a Saturday. I went back down into the dark basement and sat on my cot. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't an act. It was rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. They were mutilating my masterpiece. I pulled out my burner phone. I didn't call 911. I called a number that was saved as Frank City Hall. Frank is the chief building inspector for the city. We worked together on the municipal stadium project in the 90s. He owes me a favor, and more importantly, he hates unlicensed contractors with the fire of 1,000 suns. "It is Bernie," I whispered into the phone. 742 Lakeview Drive. Unpermitted demolition. Structural interference. They are cutting the main stack, Frank. I didn't have to say anything else. I heard the distinct sound of car keys jingling on the other end. I hung up and waited. Upstairs, the noise was deafening. The saw whined, the hammers pounded. I could hear the wood splintering. I closed my eyes and counted the minutes. 32 minutes later, the noise stopped. It didn't taper off. It stopped abruptly. Cut short. Then came the pounding on the front door. Heavy, authoritative pounding. The kind of knock that demands to be answered. I crept up the stairs and pressed my ear to the door. "Who are you?" Brittany's voice was shrill, defensive. "You can't just walk in here." I opened the basement door just a crack. Frank was standing in the foyer wearing his city windbreaker and holding a clipboard. He looked like doom. Behind him were 2 police officers. "I am the chief building inspector, ma'am," Frank said, his voice booming. "We received a report of unauthorized structural demolition." And looking at this mess, I would say the report was an understatement. He walked past her, stepping over the debris. He looked at the wall where the guys had hacked a 2-foot hole. He looked at the exposed plumbing. He looked at the cut stud. "Everyone out," Frank barked at the workers. "Tools down. Get out. Now." The workers didn't argue. They grabbed their saws and bolted out the back door, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. They knew the drill. They didn't want to get cited. Brittany was shaking. "This is my house. I have rights." "You have a stop work order," Frank said, slapping a bright red sticker onto the front window. "And you have a violation of Municipal Code Section 402, performing structural alterations without a permit, performing plumbing alterations without a license, creating a hazardous condition." He turned to Jason, who looked like he was about to vomit. "Are you the homeowner?" Frank asked. Jason looked at me, then back at Frank. My father is, but I am handling his affairs." "Then you are handling this," Frank said, scribbling on a pink carbon copy ticket. "That is a $5,000 fine for the lack of permit, a $2,000 fine for the noise ordinance violation on a weekend, and a $3,000 fine for the structural hazard. That is $10,000. Payable immediately, or I put a lien on the property and condemn the structure until it is rectified by a licensed engineer." $10,000, Brittany screeched. "That is insane." "Bernie, tell him. Tell him we are allowed to do this." She turned to me, expecting the confused old man to save her. I stepped out of the shadows, blinking my eyes. "I told you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I told you the house would get hurt." Frank looked at me. He didn't wink. He didn't smile. He played it perfectly straight, "Sir." "Are you safe here?" Frank asked. "Is this construction creating a livable environment?" Brittany stepped in front of me, blocking Frank's view. "He is fine. He loves the renovation." He is just confused. Frank handed the ticket to Jason. 10,000. You have 24 hours to pay the fine and secure a licensed contractor to shore up that wall, or I condemn the house and everyone leaves. Have a nice day. He walked out, leaving the red tag glowing on the window like a scarlet letter. The silence in the room was absolute. Then Brittany exploded. You, she screamed, spinning around to face me. This is your fault. You jinxed it. You and your bad energy. You called them, didn't you? You senile old bat, you called the city. I shrank back, holding my hands up. I don't know the number, I stammered. I just wanted the noise to stop. Jason sank onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. $10,000, Britt. We don't have $10,000. We have to pay it, Brittany hissed. If they condemn the house, we can't sell it. We can't live here. We have to pay it, Jason. Fix it. I watched my son pull out his phone. I watched his fingers tremble as he dialed. I knew who he was calling. He wasn't calling a bank. Banks don't lend money on Saturday mornings to unemployed crypto traders with bad credit. He was calling a hard money lender. A loan shark. Yeah, it is, Jason, he whispered into the phone, turning away from me. I need a bridge. 10. Yeah. I know the points are high. I know. Tuesday. I can pay you back Tuesday. I promise. The house sells on Tuesday. He hung up and looked at Brittany. His face was gray. It is done. But if we don't close on Tuesday... We will close, Brittany said, glaring at me. We will close if I have to drag him to the signing table myself. Get him back in the basement. I don't want to look at him. Jason grabbed my arm roughly. Come on, Dad. Downstairs. He marched me back to my cell, but as he pushed me through the door, I saw it. The fear in his eyes, the sheer, unadulterated panic. He had just borrowed $10,000 from people who break legs for a living, promising them money he didn't have from a house he didn't own. I sat on my cot and listened to them arguing upstairs. They were terrified. But they had no idea. The $10,000 was just the appetizer. The main course was coming on Tuesday, and I was the chef. I pulled the blanket up. The dust was still settling, but the air felt cleaner somehow. I had stopped them from destroying the wall. I had preserved the structure. Now I just had to wait for the demolition of their lives to finish. It was Sunday night, and the basement felt more like a tomb than ever. The dust from the aborted demolition upstairs had settled into the cracks of the floorboards above me, but the air down here was still thick with the smell of damp concrete and betrayal. I could hear them walking around overhead. Pace. Thud. Pace. Thud. Jason was walking the floor. I knew why. He was 48 hours away from the deadline with the hard money lender. He had borrowed $10,000 at an interest rate that would make a credit card company blush, and he had promised them a payday on Tuesday. He was terrified. I sat on the edge of my cot listening to the furnace kick on. It was a rhythmic, mechanical sound that usually soothed me, but tonight, it sounded like a gavel banging in a courtroom. I had made up my mind, but I needed to do one last thing. I needed to give him one last chance. Not the man upstairs who was drinking my scotch and planning my eviction. I needed to give a chance to the boy I had taught to fish on the pier at Pier 57. The boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I stood up and walked to the stairs. I didn't go up. I just knocked on the heavy wooden door. 3 sharp raps. It took a minute before I heard the lock turn. The door opened, and Jason stood there backlit by the hallway light. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He was sweating even though the house was cool. Dad? He said, his voice tight. What is it? Do you need the bathroom again? Brittany is in the shower, so you have to wait. I need to talk to you, Jason, I said. Just you. Come downstairs. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the living room where I could hear the television blaring. He didn't want Brittany to know. He was afraid of her. But he was more afraid of what I might say if I started shouting up the stairs. "Fine," he hissed. 5 minutes. He stepped onto the landing and closed the door, leaving us in the semi-darkness of the stairwell. He didn't come all the way down. He stood 3 steps up, looking down at me like a warden visiting a prisoner. "Make it quick, Dad," he said, crossing his arms. "We have guests coming over later. A little housewarming thing. Brittany wants the mood light. A housewarming party." They hadn't even owned the house for 24 hours in their minds, and they were already popping champagne. "Jason," I said, ignoring the comment, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. For once in your life." He rolled his eyes, shifting his weight. "I am tired, Dad." "What is it?" I walked over to the milk crate where I kept my few personal items. I picked up a small framed photo of my 1968 Ford F-100. I bought that truck new. I restored it bolt by bolt. It sits in a garage 3 blocks away, rented under my name. It is pristine, candy apple red. It is worth $40,000 easily to the right collector. I held the photo out to him. "I know things are tight," I said, my voice soft. "I know moving is expensive, and I know you have been stressed." "I am fine," he snapped, not looking at the photo. "We are fine. We have plenty of money." I took a step closer. "Jason, look at me. I am your father. I know when you are in trouble. Is there a debt? Is there someone you owe money to?" He flinched. It was subtle, a tiny tick in his jaw, but I saw it. The engineer in me saw the stress fracture widening. "Why would you say that?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Who have you been talking to?" "No one," I lied. "I just see how worried you are. Listen to me. I can sell the truck. I can have cash by tomorrow afternoon. It isn't millions, but it is 40 or 50,000. It could help you clear the decks. If you are in trouble, Jason, let me help you. Just tell me the truth." It was a lifeline. It was a rope thrown to a drowning man. If he took it. If he broke down right then and said, "Dad, I messed up. I owe bad people money. I lost it all on crypto," I would have stopped the machine. I would have canceled the sale. I would have paid off his debt, and we would have figured it out. I would have sent Brittany packing and helped him rebuild. I was offering him redemption. He looked at the photo in my hand. Then he looked at me, and for a second I saw it. I saw the fear. I saw the boy who wanted his dad to fix it. But then he looked up at the ceiling toward the living room where his wife was. And the fear turned into something else. It turned into greed and resentment. "You think your old junker truck is going to save us?" He scoffed, his lip curling in a sneer. "You think 40 grand is going to fix anything? You have no idea, Dad. You have no idea what real money is. You sit down here in your flannel shirts, acting like a pauper, while you sit on a gold mine." I lowered the photo. "So you are in debt," I said. "It is not debt," he spat. "It is leverage. It is business. You wouldn't understand. You worked for a paycheck your whole life. I am an investor. I take risks. And yeah, maybe things are tight right now. Maybe we have a liquidity issue. But that is your fault." "My fault," I whispered. "Yes, your fault," he shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "If you had just signed the house over 6 months ago when we asked, I wouldn't have had to leverage the crypto. I wouldn't have had to go to the private lenders. We could have taken equity out. We could have flipped the market. But no. You had to be stubborn. You had to hold on to this place like it was a museum." He stepped down one more step, looming over me. And then today, calling the inspector. "Do you know what you did? You cost us $10,000, Dad. Cash. Money I didn't have. I had to borrow that today because you couldn't just keep your mouth shut and let us improve the value of the asset. You are sabotaging us. You are the reason we are in trouble. Not me. You. I stood there frozen. He wasn't just lying to me. He was lying to himself. He had rewritten history to make himself the victim and me the villain. He genuinely believed that my refusal to give him my life's work was an act of aggression. "So you don't want the truck?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "I don't want your scraps," he hissed. "I want the house. I want you to sign the power of attorney paperwork tomorrow morning. Brittany has it ready. It gives us full control. We can refinance, pay off the bridge loan, and finally breathe. That is how you help me, Dad. You get out of the way." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I looked for the son I raised. I looked for the man who used to help me change the oil in that truck on Sunday afternoons. He wasn't there. There was only a desperate, hollow stranger standing on my stairs, wearing my son's face. The hope I had been holding onto a tiny flickering flame in the center of my chest snuffed out. It didn't hurt. It was just gone, leaving behind a cold, dark certainty. "Okay," I said. He blinked, surprised by my surrender. "What?" "Okay," I repeated. "You are right. I am old. I don't understand business. I am just making things harder." He straightened up his shoulders, dropping an inch. "Now you are talking sense." "Finally. Bring the papers tomorrow morning," I said, turning away from him and walking back to my cot. "I will sign them. I just want to rest." He let out a breath, a sound of immense relief. "Good. That is good, Dad. We will do it over breakfast. We will have a nice breakfast. Pancakes. You like pancakes?" "Sure," I said, sitting down and facing the wall. "Pancakes." He stood there for another second, perhaps waiting for me to say something else, to absolve him, to tell him he was a good boy. But I said nothing. I will see you in the morning." Then he said. I heard his footsteps go up the stairs. I heard the heavy door close. And then the most painful sound of all. I heard the lock click. He locked it. After I promised to give him everything. After I surrendered. He still locked the door. I sat there in the silence, staring at the gray cinder blocks. The grief I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The structural assessment was complete. The building was beyond repair. It had to be condemned. I reached under my mattress and pulled out the manila envelope Saul had given me earlier that day. Inside was a document. It looked official. It had legal jargon and signature lines. But it wasn't a power of attorney. It was a specialized medical directive, a living will regarding organ donation and life support preferences. Saul had drafted it to look remarkably similar to the standard power of attorney forms in font and layout if you didn't read the fine print. Jason wouldn't read it. Brittany wouldn't read it. They were too arrogant, too desperate. They would see a signature line and they would see dollar signs. I took a pen from my pocket. I clicked it. "You want the house, son," I whispered to the empty room. "You can have the house, but you should have taken the truck." I laid back on the cot and closed my eyes. Upstairs, I heard the doorbell ring. The guests were arriving. The party was starting. They were going to drink my wine and laugh about their victory. Let them laugh. Tomorrow morning, I was going to sign my name. And when I did, the trap would snap shut so hard it would break their necks. I slept better that night than I had in years, because I knew that when I woke up, I wouldn't be a father anymore. I would be an executioner, and my hand would not shake. The bass from the stereo upstairs was vibrating, the exposed water pipes running along the ceiling of my cell. It was a rhythmic thumping, that shook dust loose from the rafters, coating my stale bread in a fine gray powder. It was 8 o'clock on Sunday night. I hadn't eaten since the previous day. I had the water bottles stashed in the garage fridge, but food was scarce. I found a heel of sourdough in a camping bin, stale as a brick, but it was something. I sat on the cot, chewing slowly, listening to the party above. They were celebrating. They were toasting to their good fortune, to the windfall that was about to land in their laps. I heard the clink of crystal glasses. Crystal glasses, the ones Catherine and I got for our wedding. I heard the pop of champagne corks, and I heard laughter. Loud, raucous laughter that sounded like hyenas tearing into a carcass. The door at the top of the stairs opened, letting in a blast of light and noise. Bernie Brittany's voice floated down, shrill and commanding. "Come upstairs! We have guests who want to meet you. And try to look presentable. Put on that cardigan, the one with the holes. It adds to the character." I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my lap. I put on the moth-eaten sweater she had left for me. It was part of the narrative. The poor, confused old man who couldn't take care of himself. The burden they were so graciously shouldering. I climbed the stairs, slowly gripping the rail. When I stepped into the kitchen, the light hurt my eyes. The room was packed. There were maybe 20 people squeezed into my open-concept living room. I didn't recognize a single one of them. They were Brittany's crowd. People in their 30s and 40s wearing clothes that cost too much and drinking wine they didn't appreciate. There was a man in a shiny suit talking loudly about market caps. There was a woman with injected lips taking selfies in front of my fireplace. "Oh, here he is," Brittany announced, clapping her hands to get the room's attention. "Everyone, this is Bernie, my father-in-law." The room went quiet for a second. Then a ripple of polite, condescending applause broke out. They looked at me like I was a zoo exhibit, a rescue dog that had just been brought out for adoption. "Hi, Bernie," a few voices chorused. I looked for Jason. He was standing by the wet bar pouring a drink. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was drinking heavily, his face flushed. He was trying to drown the part of his conscience that still remembered my name. Brittany took my arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. "Come sit down, Bernie. We saved you a special spot." She led me to a folding chair in the corner, away from the food, away from the comfortable seating. Hank was sprawled on my leather recliner, holding court with a group of younger men, telling stories about business ventures that I knew were lies. Linda was showing off the kitchen opening cabinets and bragging about the renovation plans. I sat in the folding chair. My stomach rumbled, audible in a lull in the music. Courtney walked by holding a plate piled high with shrimp cocktail and mini quiches. The smell was intoxicating. I looked at the plate, then up at her. She stopped smirking. She picked up a single dry cracker from the edge of the platter. "Here you go, Bernie," she said, tossing it into my lap. "Don't gorge yourself. We don't want you getting sick on the rug." She laughed and walked away, joining a group of women who giggled as she whispered something to them, probably about the senile old man who begged for food. I picked up the cracker. I didn't eat it. I crumbled it in my hand, letting the pieces fall to the floor. I sat there, invisible in the crowd, and listened. That is the thing about being the old man in the corner. People forget you are there. They forget you have ears. They assume that because you are old, you are deaf or stupid or both. So they talked. Freely. I heard Brittany talking to a woman near the window. "So what is the plan for him?" the woman asked, gesturing vaguely in my direction, what with her wineglass. "You can't keep him here once you start the demo." "Oh God, no," Brittany laughed. "We found a place in Tacoma. It is state-funded, so it won't eat into the profits from the refinance. It is basically a warehouse, but they have a bed. We drop him off on Wednesday." Wednesday, the day after the closing. "Is it clean?" the woman asked, wrinkling her nose. "Who cares?" Brittany said. "He won't know the difference. The doctor wrote the report today. Advanced dementia. Once he signs the power of attorney tomorrow morning, he is a ward of the state, essentially. We deposit him there, change the locks, and this place is ours free and clear. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the drafty basement. Tacoma, a state warehouse. They weren't just stealing my home. They were discarding me. They were throwing me away like a bag of trash to rot in a hallway, smelling of urine and bleach, while they lived in my house and spent my money. I looked at Jason again. He was laughing at something Hank said, throwing his head back. He was part of it. He had agreed to it. My son was going to drive the car that dropped me off at the warehouse. The anger I had been nursing hardened into something unbreakable. It was no longer a hot rage. It was cold steel, structural steel. Brittany clinked a spoon against her glass. "All right, everyone, quiet down," she shouted, beaming. "We have a little business to attend to. A little ceremony, if you will." She walked over to the dining table where a single document sat waiting. She beckoned to me. "Bernie, come here. It is time to sign the papers so we can start taking care of you properly." The room went silent. The guests watched with morbid curiosity. They knew what this was. This was the transfer of power. This was the moment the old king abdicated to the young usurpers. I stood up slowly, trembling just enough to sell it. I shuffled to the table. The document was there. General Durable Power of Attorney. It gave Brittany and Jason full control. Financial, medical, legal. Once I signed that, I ceased to be a person in the eyes of the law. I became an asset to be managed. Brittany handed me a pen. A nice, heavy Mont Blanc pen that I realized with a jolt was mine, stolen from my desk upstairs. "Sign right there, Bernie," she said, pointing to the line at the bottom, right next to the X. "And then we can all have cake." I looked at the paper. I looked at Brittany. Her eyes were bright with greed. She was already spending the money in her head. I looked at Jason. He had moved closer, standing behind Brittany. He looked pale, but he nodded. "Do it, Dad. It is for the best." I reached into my pocket for my reading glasses. As I pulled them out, I intentionally fumbled. My hand shook violently. The glasses clattered to the table, knocking into the wine bottle. "Oops," I muttered. "My hands. So shaky today." Brittany sighed, loud and impatient. "Jesus, Bernie. Just pick them up." While everyone looked at the glasses spinning on the wood, I made my move. It was a move I had practiced in the basement for hours. With my left hand, I reached into the inside pocket of the cardigan. I pulled out the folded document Saul had prepared, the living will regarding organ donation, which looked visually identical to the power of attorney from a distance. In one smooth motion, I placed my hand over the power of attorney, sliding it off the table and into my lap, while simultaneously sliding the living will into its place. It took less than a second, a magic trick performed by a desperate man. I bent down to pick up my glasses, stuffing the real power of attorney into my sock. I sat up, adjusting the glasses on my nose. "Is this the one?" I asked, pointing to the new document, my finger covering the title at the top. "Yes," Brittany snapped. "Just sign it, Bernie. Everyone is waiting." I uncapped the pen. I looked at the paper. Directive to physicians and family or surrogates. It authorized them to make decisions about my kidneys if I was brain dead, but it gave them absolutely zero authority over my bank account or my house. I looked at Brittany one last time. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I asked, my voice soft. "I am sure, Bernie," she said, her eyes hard. "Sign it." I signed. Bernard J. Kowalski. I signed it with a flourish. "Done," I said, capping the pen. Brittany snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. She didn't read it. She didn't check the title. She just saw the signature and the notary stamp I had already applied earlier that day with Saul. She folded it and shoved it into her pocket as if it were a winning lottery ticket. She raised her glass. To the future, she shouted. To the future, the room roared back. Jason exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He came over and patted my shoulder. "Thanks, Dad. You won't regret this." I looked at him. I looked at the son who had just sold his father for a crypto debt. "I won't regret it, Jason," I said. "But you might." He frowned, confused by my tone, but Brittany was already pulling him away toward the cake. "Okay, Bernie. Back downstairs," she said over her shoulder. "We have a lot of celebrating to do, and you need your rest. Big day tomorrow. Big day indeed." I walked back to the basement door. No one said goodbye. No one offered me a piece of cake. Courtney laughed as I passed her. "Night, night, Grandpa," she said. "Don't let the bedbugs bite." I walked down the stairs into the dark. I heard the lock click for the last time. I sat on my cot and pulled the real power of attorney out of my sock. I ripped it into tiny pieces, slowly, methodically. I piled the confetti on the concrete floor. Then I took out my lighter. I watched the paper burn. It flared up, bright and hot, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It burned until there was nothing left but ash. Upstairs, they were partying in a house they didn't own, holding a document that was worthless, celebrating a victory that was actually a trap. I lay back and listened to the music. It sounded different now. It didn't sound like a party. It sounded like the band playing on the deck of the Titanic. Tomorrow was Tuesday. Tomorrow the investment firm would wire the funds. Tomorrow the deed would transfer. And tomorrow I would introduce them to the real owner of this house. I closed my eyes and smiled in the dark. I wasn't hungry anymore. I was full of anticipation. Because revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. And I had kept it on ice just for them. Tuesday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The Seattle rain wasn't just falling, it was driving sideways, a relentless sheet of gray water that blurred the line between the lake and the lawn. To anyone else it was miserable weather, but to me, standing at the window of the study, it looked like a cleansing. The storm was fitting. It was the perfect backdrop for a demolition. It was barely 8 o'clock when the invasion force arrived. It wasn't a professional moving company. Brittany wouldn't spend money on that when she could spend it on herself. Instead, a massive yellow rental truck backed up the driveway, its tires carving deep ruts into the wet grass I had tended for 20 years. Hank was behind the wheel, a cigarette dangling from his lips, narrowly missing my stone pillars as he maneuvered the beast. Behind him came Linda's sedan packed to the roof with boxes, and Courtney's minivan, which looked like it had exploded from the inside with toys and clothes pressed against the glass. They parked on the lawn. They actually parked on the lawn. Brittany was standing on the porch under a massive golf umbrella, directing traffic like she was landing planes. She was wearing rain boots and a trench coat, shouting orders over the sound of the storm. "Careful with that dresser," she screamed at the 2-day laborers they had hired off the street. "That is vintage." I watched through the glass. It wasn't vintage. It was particle board veneer peeling at the corners, but in her mind, everything she touched turned to gold. They weren't just moving in. They were colonizing. They dragged mattress after mattress up the stairs. They hauled boxes marked kitchen and master bath and fragile. They were erasing me. Every box that went through the front door was a tombstone for the life Catherine and I had built here. I looked for Jason. He was standing by the tailgate of the truck, soaking wet. He wasn't helping. He was just standing there holding a box of his own things, old trophies maybe, or books, and he just stared at the house. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. He wasn't moving with the frenetic energy of his wife or the greedy entitlement of his in-laws. He looked heavy, burdened. I wondered if he felt it. The shift in the air. The seismic tremor of ownership changing hands. Or maybe he was just thinking about the $10,000 he owed the loan shark, which was due today. He probably thought selling the house would fix it. He probably thought he had won. I walked out of the study and into the foyer. The front door was propped open, letting the damp chill invade the house. Hank walked past me carrying a lamp shaped like a hula dancer. "Hey, Pops," he grunted, blowing smoke that swirled in the humid air. "Make yourself useful and hold the door. Or don't. Just try not to die on the carpet, we just had it cleaned." He laughed, a wet hacking sound, and kept walking, depositing his trashy furniture into my sanctuary. I stepped onto the porch. Brittany saw me and rolled her eyes. "Bernie, you are in the way," she snapped. "Go back to the basement. We need to get the sofa through the door, and you are blocking the flow. Seriously, why are you even up here?" I didn't move. I just looked at her. I looked at the rain dripping off the eaves. I checked my watch. 8:58. "I am just watching," I said, my voice calm. "It is quite an operation you have here." "It is called efficiency, Bernie," she said, checking her clipboard. "Something you wouldn't understand. We are going to have this place unpacked by noon. Then we can start the real work. Oh, and don't get comfortable in the kitchen later. Mom is going to be reorganizing the pantry, and she hates clutter." Clutter. That is what I was to her. Human clutter. Linda pushed past me carrying a box of shoes. "Move it, old man," she muttered. "God, this place smells like old people. We are going to need so much bleach." They were so confident, so incredibly arrogant. They thought they held all the cards. They had the fake medical report. They had the fake power of attorney. They had the keys. They had physically occupied the territory. In their minds, the war was over and they were just setting up the victory camp. I felt a vibration in my pocket. My phone. One single text message. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain. It was from Saul. "Done. Funds cleared, title transferred. Sheriff is 2 minutes out." That one word changed the gravity of the earth. Done. The wire transfer had cleared. The deed was recorded. The house, this beautiful timber and glass structure standing firm against the storm, no longer belonged to the Catherine Kowalski Memorial Trust. It belonged to the Pacific Northwest Investment Group, and I was no longer a homeowner being pushed out. I was a tenant with a lease, and they were trespassers. I looked at Jason again. He had finally moved, walking up the steps with his box. He stopped when he saw me. "Dad," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. Just go downstairs, okay? Please, don't make a scene." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who would sell me for a crypto debt. "I am not going downstairs, Jason," I said. Brittany spun around. "Excuse me." "What did you say?" "I said, I am not going downstairs," I repeated louder this time, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain and the shouting movers. "And neither are you." She laughed, a high-pitched sound of disbelief. "Oh, is the dementia acting up again, Jason? Get your father, he is having an episode. He is confused." But Jason didn't move. He was looking past me. He was looking at the end of the driveway, because through the curtain of rain, headlights were approaching. Not a moving truck, not a guest. 2 black SUVs moving with the slow, predatory grace of government vehicles, and behind them the flashing blue lights of the King County Sheriff. Brittany followed Jason's gaze. Her smile faltered. Her clipboard lowered. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice losing its edge. I checked my watch again. 9:05. "The landlords," I said. "And they are very strict about pets." The black SUVs cut through the downpour like sharks through dark water. They didn't pull into the driveway, they blocked it. They parked bumper to bumper, sealing the exit, trapping the rental truck and the sedan and the minivan in a cage of steel and chrome. The flashing blue lights of the sheriff's cruiser reflected off the wet pavement, creating a strobe effect that made the whole scene feel like a nightmare in slow motion. The driver's door of the lead SUV opened, and a man stepped out. He didn't run from the rain. He walked with a measured, terrifying calm, while a driver held a large black umbrella over his head. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Jason's car. He looked at the chaos on the lawn, the soaked furniture, the shouting movers, and he frowned, not with anger, but with the disdain of a man who has just stepped in something unpleasant. Behind him, the sheriff stepped out of the cruiser. He was a mountain of a man with a waterproof jacket that said King County Sheriff in bold yellow letters. He rested his hand casually on his belt. Brittany marched down the steps, her boots splashing in the puddles. She looked like a general whose parade had been interrupted. "Excuse me," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at the man in the suit. "You are blocking my movers. We are on a tight schedule. Move your cars immediately, or I will have you towed." The man in the suit stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her clipboard. He looked at the house. Then he looked at me, standing on the porch. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "I am Mr. Blackwood, representing the Pacific Northwest Investment Group," he said, his voice cutting through the wind. "And you are trespassing on private corporate property." Brittany laughed. It was a brittle, hysterical sound. "Trespassing? Are you insane? This is my house. Well, it is my father-in-law's house, and I am his legal guardian. We are moving in. You are the one trespassing." She turned to the sheriff, expecting backup. "Officer, tell him to move. We have rights here." The sheriff didn't move. He just looked at Mr. Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood reached into his jacket and pulled out a document protected by a plastic sleeve. "This is the recorded deed," he said, holding it up. "Pacific Northwest Investment Group purchased this property 48 hours ago. The transaction is complete. The title is clear. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, this property is under our jurisdiction. We have not authorized any tenants. We have not authorized any movers. And we certainly have not authorized you." Jason had walked down the steps, now standing behind his wife, soaking wet and shivering. "Purchased," he stammered. "That is impossible. My dad, he didn't sell anything. He can't sell anything. He is not competent." Brittany's eyes lit up. She reached into her raincoat pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper I had signed the night before. The paper she hadn't bothered to read. The paper she thought was the key to the kingdom. "Exactly," she shouted, waving the damp paper in Mr. Blackwood's face. "He is not competent, and I have the proof right here. This is a general durable power of attorney signed by Bernard Kowalski last night in front of witnesses. It gives me full control over his assets, including this property. Any sale he made is void because he lacks capacity. I am in charge here." She turned to me, a sneer twisting her face. "Nice try, Bernie. You thought you could sell it out from under us, but you were too slow. I have the signature. I have the power." She thrust the paper toward the sheriff. "Read it. Arrest these people for harassment." The sheriff took the paper. He shined his flashlight on it, shielding it from the rain. He read the top line. Then he read the middle. His eyebrows went up. "Ma'am, have you read this document?" the sheriff asked. "Of course I have." Brittany lied. "It gives me everything." The rear door of the second SUV opened. A familiar figure stepped out, holding his own umbrella. It was Saul. He walked up the driveway, his face grim. "Actually, Brittany," Saul said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of courtroom battles, "it doesn't give you everything. It gives you his kidneys." Brittany froze. "What?" Saul stepped next to the sheriff and tapped the paper. "That is not a power of attorney," Saul said. "That is a directive to physicians regarding anatomical gifts. It is a living will, Brittany. You didn't sign a document to take his house. You signed a document witnessing his desire to donate his organs to science upon his death." I watched Jason's face. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse. He grabbed the paper from the sheriff's hand. He read the title. Directive to physicians and family or surrogates. It says he wants to be a donor, Jason whispered, his voice trembling. It says nothing about the house. Brittany snatched it back. Her eyes scanned the page frantically, looking for the words asset, or finance, or property. She found words like vegetative state and life support and cornea transplant. "You tricked me," she screamed, spinning around to face me. "You switched the papers. You senile old fraud, you switched them." I stepped off the porch. I didn't need the cane anymore. I stood tall. I didn't switch anything, I said, my voice steady and cold. I signed exactly what you put in front of me. If you were too greedy to read it, that is not dementia. That is stupidity. Mr. Blackwood stepped forward. "Since you have no legal claim to this property, and you are not tenants on the lease, you are currently committing criminal trespass. You have exactly 10 minutes to remove your personal property and vacate the premises. After that, anything left on this land becomes the property of the investment group and will be hauled to the dump." The dump. All her boxes, her clothes, her parents' furniture. Everything was sitting in the rain, about to be scooped up by a trash crew. "But we live here," Brittany wailed. "We moved our stuff in. You have to evict us. You have to give us 30 days. Saul shook his head. "You have been here for less than 24 hours. You haven't established residency. You haven't received mail here. You haven't paid utilities. You are not tenants, Brittany. You are intruders. And in the state of Washington, intruders do not get 30 days. They get handcuffs." The sheriff took a step forward, his hand resting on his cuffs. "I suggest you start loading that truck back up, folks," he said. "Right now." Hank, who had been watching from the doorway, threw his cigarette into a puddle. "This is bull," he shouted. "We have rights. My daughter owns this place." "No, sir," the sheriff said. "She owns a piece of paper that says Mr. Kowalski can donate his liver. That is all she owns. Now move." Panic set in. It was absolute and total. Linda started screaming at the movers to put the boxes back on the truck, but the movers, seeing the police, backed away. "We are done, lady," one of the workers said. "We didn't sign up for cops." They jumped in their van and peeled out, leaving the rental truck sitting open in the rain. Jason looked at me. "Dad, please. You can't let them do this. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him. I thought about the $10,000 he borrowed. I thought about the basement. I thought about the blue pills. "I don't know, Jason," I said. "But I hear the facility in Tacoma has beds available." Mr. Blackwood checked his watch. "You have 8 minutes," he said. Brittany looked at the house, then at me, then at the sheriff. Her face crumbled. The mask of the superior executive finally fell away, revealing the terrified child underneath. But the worst was yet to come. Because Saul wasn't done. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another file. "Sheriff, while you are here," Saul said, "I would like to file a formal complaint on behalf of my client regarding a separate matter." He pointed at Jason. "We have evidence that this man forged Mr. Kowalski's signature on pension checks for the last 6 months. We also have proof of identity theft regarding unauthorized credit lines opened in my client's name." The sheriff looked at Jason. Jason looked at the wet pavement. "Is this true?" the sheriff asked. Jason didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was a confession, loud and clear. "Turn around, son," the sheriff said, pulling the handcuffs from his belt. Brittany screamed. Not for her husband. She screamed because she realized the stolen money she had been using to pay for her Range Rover was gone. And she was next. I watched as the metal cuffs clicked around my son's wrists. It was a sound I will never forget. It was the sound of a bridge collapsing. "I warned you," I whispered. "I told you that you would regret it." The rain fell harder, washing the dust of the demolition away, washing the driveway clean. The house stood silent and strong behind me. It had survived earthquakes, it had survived storms, and now it had survived my family. The sheriff did not wait for the rain to let up. He gestured to his deputies who had arrived in a second patrol car. "Move them out," he commanded. The eviction was swift and merciless. Hank tried to argue, puffing up his chest and shouting about squatters' rights, but a deputy simply took his arm and escorted him off the property. Linda followed, clutching a box of porcelain figurines that were getting soaked, her fur coat looking like a drowned rat. Courtney was crying. Her children huddled around her, asking why Grandpa Bernie was being mean. I watched it all from the porch, dry under the overhang. I felt no pity. Pity is for victims. These people were predators who had simply chosen the wrong prey. Jason stood frozen in the driveway, the rain plastering his hair to his skull. The handcuffs glinted on his wrists. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. "Why, Dad," he whispered, his voice lost in the storm. "Why did you call the cops? We could have worked this out." "Worked it out." I repeated, my voice carrying over the wind. "You stole from me, Jason. For 6 months, you forged my signature on my pension checks. You stole my identity to open credit cards. You didn't just want my house. You wanted my life." Saul stepped forward, holding a file protected from the rain. "We have the bank records, Jason. The handwriting analysis. The IP addresses used to open the accounts. It is all here. Grand larceny, identity theft, elder financial abuse. In Washington state, that last one carries a mandatory sentence enhancement. You are looking at 5 to 10 years, son." Jason's knees buckled. A deputy caught him before he hit the asphalt. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just sagged, the fight draining out of him like water from a broken pipe. He realized finally that the game was not just over. It was a massacre. Brittany was pacing by the rental truck, screaming into her phone. "You can't fire me," she shrieked. "I am your top producer. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain the expenses." She stopped, listening to the voice on the other end. Her face went white as a sheet. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand trembling. "They fired me," she whispered, staring at the wet pavement. "They fired me for cause. Embezzlement. They said someone sent them the internal audit." She looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with a dawning horror. You did this." I didn't say anything. I just looked at Saul. Saul gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "My private investigator is very thorough," Saul said, his voice calm. "When we looked into your finances, Brittany, we found discrepancies. Large discrepancies. Corporate expenses paid to shell companies you own. We felt it was our civic duty to inform your employer anonymously, of course." Brittany dropped the phone. It hit a puddle with a splash. She didn't pick it up. She just stood there in the rain, her career, her home, her husband, and her future all dissolving around her. "You ruined us!" she screamed, lunging toward the porch. "You ruined everything!" A deputy stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am, I suggest you step back. You are already trespassing. Don't add assault to the list." She stopped, breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She looked at Jason in handcuffs. She looked at her parents shivering by the road. She looked at me, the old man she had planned to discard. And then she broke. She fell to her knees in the mud, her expensive jeans ruined, and she wailed. A sound of pure despair. "It is over," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Get off my property." The deputies began to guide them away. Hank and Linda were loaded into the back of the rental truck like cargo. Courtney and the kids were directed to her minivan. Brittany was escorted to her car. And Jason, my son, was placed in the back of the sheriff's cruiser. As they drove him away, he looked out the window at me. His face was a mask of regret and fear. I didn't look away. I watched him go. I watched my son leave my life in the back of a police car, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The tumor had been removed. The structure was sound again. The driveway was empty now except for the puddles and the debris of their failed invasion. The rain began to slow, turning to a gentle mist. Saul closed his umbrella. "Well, Bernie," he said. "That is that." "Not quite," I said. I walked down the steps past the spot where Brittany had knelt. I walked to the edge of the driveway where the mailbox stood. I opened it and pulled out a single envelope that I had placed there earlier. I walked back to Saul. "This is for the trust," I said, handing him the envelope. "It is the deed to the commercial buildings. I want them liquidated too, all of it." Saul looked surprised. "Everything. Everything," I said. "The house, the buildings, the gold. Liquidate it all. Put the proceeds into the Catherine Kowalski Foundation. Full scholarships for engineering students from low-income families. And a significant donation to the Elder Abuse Prevention Center." "And you," Saul asked. "What about you?" I looked at the house one last time. It was just wood and glass now. The memories were still there, but the ghosts were gone. "I have a truck," I said, smiling. "A 1968 Ford F-100. It runs like a dream. And I have a passport." Saul smiled. "Italy." "Italy," I confirmed. "Then maybe France. I hear the architecture is something to see." I turned my back on the house. I didn't need it anymore. I had rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth, and that was the only structure that mattered. The rain stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the wet pavement. I walked toward my new life, leaving the wreckage of the old one behind me in the mud. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I felt free. I stepped back out onto the porch, but the man who emerged was not the confused retiree in the moth-eaten cardigan they had mocked for days. I had taken 10 minutes inside the empty house to change my final act of transformation. I wore a charcoal gray bespoke suit cut from Italian wool that I had bought in Milan 20 years ago. It still fit perfectly, hugging my shoulders with the weight of authority. My shoes were oxblood leather, polished to a mirror shine by a cobbler downtown who knows my name. I adjusted my silk tie and took a deep breath of the wet Seattle air. It tasted of ozone and absolute victory. The scene in the driveway was a tableau of absolute misery. My son Jason was sitting in the back of the sheriff cruiser, the door still open, while the deputy finalized some paperwork. When he saw me step out, he lunged against the window, his face pressed against the glass, distorting his features into a mask of pure panic. The deputy opened the door to check on him, and Jason took the opportunity to scream. "Dad, help me," he wailed, his voice cracking like a teenager. "You cannot let them take me. I am your son. Fix this, Dad." "You always fix it." I walked down the steps slowly, not because I was frail, but because I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see the man he had underestimated. I walked past Brittany, who was sitting on her suitcase in the mud, her expensive coat, ruined her makeup, streaked down her face like war paint. Gone wrong. She looked up at me and opened her mouth to curse, to scream, to blame me, but no sound came out. She just stared at the suit. She stared at the shoes. She realized in that moment that she had never known me at all. Hank and Linda were huddled together under a plastic tarp one of the movers had left behind. They looked like wet, stray dogs. Hank did not have a cigarette now. He did not have a witty remark. He just looked cold and old and homeless. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but I extinguished it instantly. They were adults. They had made their choices. I stopped at the open door of the police car. I leaned down so I was eye level with Jason. He smelled of sweat and fear. "Dad. Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission. I will pay it back, I swear. Just get me out of here." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had carried on my shoulders. The boy I had taught to drive. The boy I had loved more than my own life. And I realized that boy was gone. He had been consumed by the weak, greedy man sitting in handcuffs before me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not a check. It was a copy of the trust amendment I had finalized with Saul that morning. I held it up so he could read it. The house is lovely. Jason, I said. My voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. Brittany was right about that. The view of the lake is spectacular. It is a shame it is not mine anymore or yours. He stared at me, blinking through his tears. What he whispered. I sold it, I said. $4.5 million, cash. The wire hit the account an hour ago. His eyes widened. Hope flared in them, a desperate, ugly hope. $4 million, he breathed. Dad, you can use that. You can bail me out. You can pay the lawyers. We can start over. I shook my head slowly. No, Jason, we cannot. Because that money is not for you. I transferred every single cent into the Catherine Kowalski Memorial Trust 5 minutes ago. It is locked tight. Not even I can touch the principal. He slumped back against the seat. The hope dying instantly replaced by a horror so deep it looked like physical pain. However, I continued leaning in closer. I am not a monster. I know you will have expenses when you get out. Lawyers' court fines. Maybe a small apartment in a bad neighborhood, so I set up a stipend. A stipend, he asked, his voice trembling. Yes, I said. The trust will pay you exactly $500 a month for life. It is enough to buy food, Jason. It is enough so you will not starve. But it is not enough for crypto. It is not enough for Range Rovers. And it is certainly not enough for her. I jerked my head toward Brittany, who was watching us from the mud. $500, Jason choked out. That is nothing. It is $500 more than you deserve, I said, standing up straight and buttoning my jacket. It is $500 more than you would have given me if you had put me in that warehouse in Tacoma. Consider it a mercy. Good luck. Son, I said. You are going to need it. I signaled the deputy. He nodded and slammed the car door shut. I watched through the glass as Jason started to scream again, but the sound was muffled now, distant. It was the sound of my past fading away. A low purr drew my attention to the street. A car was pulling up to the curb. It was not a taxi. It was not a rideshare. It was my 1958 Bentley S1 silver and black, pristine and elegant. I had kept it in storage for special occasions. This felt like a special occasion. The driver, and a young man I employed to maintain the vehicle, stepped out and opened the rear door with a white-gloved hand. He held a large black umbrella shielding me from the last drops of rain. Mr. Kowalski, he said. Your car is ready, sir. I walked toward it. My shoes clicked on the pavement. I felt the gaze of Brittany and her parents on my back. I knew what they were seeing. They were seeing the millions. They had let slip through their fingers because they were too arrogant to look past a flannel shirt. They were seeing the life they could have had if they had just been decent human beings. I stopped at the car door. I looked back at the house one last time. It stood tall and gray against the sky. It was empty now. A shell. The life was leaving with me. I slid into the leather seat. It smelled of old money and freedom. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, shutting out the noise of the wind, the rain, and the weeping of my former family. I pulled out my phone. I opened the airline app. Did not look for economy. I did not look for deals. I scrolled to the international section, Rome one way, first class. I pressed book. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Where to, sir? He asked. The airport. Michael, I said, leaning back and closing my eyes, and take the scenic route. I want to enjoy the view. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding over the wet asphalt. I did not look back. I did not look at the police car carrying my son to jail. I did not look at the woman who had slapped my face. I looked forward. I thought about Italy. I thought about the wine. I thought about the architecture. I thought about Catherine, and how she always wanted to see the Colosseum. I would see it for her. I was 72 years old. I was alone. I was homeless in the technical sense. But as the city skyline rose up to meet me, I realized something. I was not just an old man who had lost his family. I was a man who had reclaimed his life. I had cut out the rot. I had reinforced the foundation. And now I was free. The engine hummed a quiet song of power and luxury. I touched the screen of my phone, looking at the confirmation code for my flight. Arrivederci, I whispered. And I smiled. A real, genuine smile. The nightmare was over. The adventure was just beginning. Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is realizing that you cannot save your children from themselves, especially when they become the architects of their own destruction. For years, I confused enabling with loving and silence with peace. But I learned that dignity has no price tag, and true family is built on respect, not transaction. Walking away from my son was the most painful thing I ever did, but it was also the only way to reclaim the life I built. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, treat you like an obstacle in your own home. If you believe that respect must be earned and boundaries must be kept, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.